everyone! In the lectures that follow, I'm going to introduce you to 8 different concepts about listening comprehension for non-native speakers of English. Have you ever watched a movie in English without subtitles, or been in a conversation with all English speakers? You probably, or might, have had a hard time understanding everything that they were saying, right? Well, don't worry, this is a normal occurrence, so you're not alone. The following video segments focus on the main problems an English learner might have in understanding spoken English. So I also hope to give you some tips along the way that I'm going to call recommendations that can help minimize these problems. So let's get started. Let's picture the problems like you're driving down the Séptima in Bogotá, and all of a sudden students come out of nowhere and start protesting. You can't keep going because they're in the way. Now also think about this. If you're on a highway and a rock falls in the middle of the highway, you obviously cannot keep going unless the rock is removed. So I want you to picture these problems like the rock or like the protests, because if these problems are in your way, you may not be able to understand what is being said. So you first have to remove the rock to be able to keep going, or to be able to keep understanding what is being said. So you can remove the problem by actively engaging strategies that you can use to improve your listening comprehension. The first problem we're going to talk about is hearing the sounds of English. Now this problem is when there are sounds in English that are not in your native language. Now in this class, I know you've studied the different sounds of English and you've compared them to the sounds in Spanish. Now when you think about that, it does help your pronunciation, but it also helps your listening ability in English. For example, ch exists in Spanish, but the other one, sh, does not exist in Spanish. Neither does the sound zh in usual, or v doesn't exist in Spanish either. And another example would be z, that doesn't exist in Spanish. However, the unvoiced version, s, or voiceless, s, does exist in Spanish. So you could see how this might be confusing. There are some other sounds that don't exist in Spanish that exist in English. Therefore, when the Spanish speaker hears the sound v and d in English, sometimes they process everything as d, as in the word there. They might hear it as dare. So when there are sounds in the language you're learning that aren't in your native language, sometimes you just don't hear the difference. This is the problem here when we have the word teacher and the word t-shirt. Many Spanish speakers hear teacher y teacher and not t-shirt and teacher. In English, they have 2 different sounds. Just like if we use s and z. Sometimes the Spanish speaker cannot distinguish between these and this. For Spanish speakers, it sounds like dis and dis. It is the same with z. Also, the vowel here is e, and the vowel here is I. This is another sound which does not exist in Spanish. Another sound that is difficult for many English learners to hear is the I sound that I just mentioned in the word this. This sound is found in the words ship, fit, hit, and dip. Now, how do you think the non-native speaker might hear these words? Well, they might approximate these sounds to a sound in their native language, like E or E. So these 4 words might sound to somebody like sheep, feet, heat, or deep. Uh-oh, do you see a problem? I do. The meaning of those words is completely different from the meaning of the words ship, fit, hit, and dip. So let's try a brief exercise where I want you to listen to the word that I'm saying. I'll show you 2 words. You have to think about and write down the word that I say. Ready? Steal, sin, pitch, feast, peel. Now, here are the answers. The words that I said are underlined. So you can see how this could create a problem. If we take the word ship and sheep, those words have completely different meanings, right? One is a furry, large animal, and the other one is a big boat. But in the following sentence, which one am I using? We washed the ship. Not so sure? Or even worse, you could think I'm saying a bad word when I say sheet of paper or beach. Let's go to the beach. So what can you do? Well, of course, you can use the context to help you. This is the main strategy learners can use to distinguish the sounds. For example, if you're watching a movie about a ship, the big boat, you probably will interpret the sentence, we washed the ship, that they washed the big boat. Or in a conversation that is about cooking, you can interpret the sentence, we heat the pan, that they make the pan hot, and not that they hit the pan. But there is a problem with using the context. It might take you a few seconds to figure out the right word, and conversation happens so fast that you cannot waste any time. So how can you overcome the problem? Well, here are some recommendations. 1. Identify the English sounds that are not in your native language. Then learn to distinguish them from the common sounds in English. 2. Learn to correctly pronounce the sounds. This will train your ear to listen carefully to the sounds when spoken to you. So the next time someone says to you, I saw a bear with a beard drinking beer and talking to a bird, you will know exactly what they mean. The second thing we're going to talk about is understanding stress and intonation. You know that in English, some syllables are longer and louder than other syllables. You've learned this in your course. For example, if I have the word morning, the first syllable is stronger and louder than the second one. We say morning, not morning or morning. That just sounds silly. The first syllable is longer and stronger than the second. This is what we call stress. Okay, so this is stress in words, and you already know a lot about this. But we also have stress in sentences. So if I say, where are you going this morning? Some of the words in this sentence have more stress than other words, like the words where, going, and morning. And the syllable that is stressed in these words is what you hear. Where are you going this morning? This is how native speakers speak. and we reduce the parts of the sentence which are not critical to the meaning. So what kinds of words do we reduce? Auxiliaries, like the word are, pronouns, like you and this, and endings, like the ing ending. And the parts that remain strong, these are the parts that carry the meaning, that carry the information. So because what is important in the sentence, where, going, and morning, that's what's important. When you're listening to a native speaker of English, and you are not a native speaker, you think maybe that the native speaker is speaking poorly. Perhaps you think the native speaker is not speaking clearly. The native speaker is not saying all of the words clearly, because the native speaker doesn't say, "Where are you going this morning?" No. The native speaker says, "Where are you going this morning?" So when you listen to English by native speakers, the stress in the sentence shows you what the information is. And it's true that native speakers don't say all the words clearly. They make reductions. This helps to create the rhythm of English. Take this sentence, for example. Do you know what I mean? Did you understand me? It probably sounds like I was saying just one word. Now, try this one. The engineer is interested in protecting the environment. Did you get that one right? Here's what I said. Sometimes, in order to use the rhythm of English, speakers have to fit a lot of syllables into one phrase. So native speakers do not say everything clearly. This is not because they are lazy. This is not because they are not educated. It's what happens when we speak quickly. This is what happens with all native speakers when they speak quickly. So, in addition to stress, we can talk about intonation. Well, what do you know about intonation? You know that if your intonation goes up, you're asking a question, right? So if I say, "Are you feeling okay?" you know that I'm asking a question. This is the voice rising, like music. Right? Intonation. And you know that if the intonation goes down, then I'm not asking a question, and I'm actually showing that I am certain. So if I say, "She's from Colombia," with falling intonation, you know it's a statement. But in English, intonation is used in many other ways. This is where it can be trouble for learners. Different kinds of intonation can show the attitudes of the speaker. So if I say, "She's from Colombia," with my voice going up at the end, then you know that I'm surprised or I doubt that she's from Colombia. So, what is the difference in attitudes for the following sentences said with different intonation? So I'm going to say one sentence, and you have to determine my attitude, how I'm saying the sentence. "Oh, fun. We have to speak in English." "Oh, fun. We get to speak in English." Did you notice the difference in my attitude? The first was sarcasm. The second was pure delight. Let's look at some recommendations for stress and intonation. 1. Remember that native speakers do not say every word clearly. Listen for the stressed words in a sentence, and you'll find the important parts of the message. 2. Use intonation to help you. Listen to the voice and notice if it's going up or down. Is the speaker making a statement, asking a question, or are they showing an attitude? And 3, listen to a lot of informal speech in English. This will help you get used to the way people use stress and intonation. So that is stress and intonation. Remember, not only the words are important. The third issue we're going to talk about is noise. Now, what is noise? Well, you know what noise is. Noise is the traffic in Bogota. Noise is a concert. But when we talk about listening comprehension, noise is something very different. Noise is anything you can't understand. Noise is the English that you can't process. Noise can be made of words you don't know, or words you do know, but don't recognize when said quickly in a sentence. So if you're listening to English, some of what you listen to is simply blah, 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 blah. It's not coming in as words with meaning. There is simply no understanding. So people get confused and discouraged. So there are two things we need to pay attention to with noise. One, when you are listening in Spanish, you have noise as well. Think about this. When you're listening in Spanish, sometimes you're listening and sometimes you're not listening. And sometimes when you're not listening, all you hear are simply words, 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 but they don't mean anything to you. You don't get the message. I often see students writing essays listening to music. This is noise. It's sound coming in, but they're not paying attention to it. Or when you're in class, sometimes, I know this might happen, the teacher is talking and you're looking on the internet. The teacher is talking, but all you are hearing is blah, 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 blah. Does that ever happen to you? I bet it does. So, a certain amount of noise is normal when you're in any language situation. Now, the other thing is the quantity of noise. This is what makes noise difficult for learners of English. You will experience more noise in English. There will be more that you do not understand. So more of what is said will sound like wah, 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 or blah, 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 blah. The more noise, the more difficult the listening comprehension exercise will be. It doesn't matter where you are, if you're in an English-speaking country or in a class, if you're watching television, the more noise, the more difficulty you will have generally making sense out of what people say. I experience this noise in Spanish. I've lived in Bogota 2 years now, but sometimes I still don't understand what people are saying. So when I'm with all Spanish speakers, sometimes they use slang or they'll mumble their words or they'll talk really quietly. And all I hear is wah, 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 wah. It's especially funny and frustrating when I hear my name very clearly in the sentence, but I don't understand the rest. So it sounds something like this. Blah, 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 Corrie, blah, 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 blah. What on earth are they saying about me? Well, what's the solution for noise? Well, a problem that happens is that sometimes learners try to understand everything that is said. You might try to have 100% comprehension. But this is not realistic because you are going to have noise. The trouble is, you might concentrate very hard, too hard, to understand everything. But remember, a certain amount of noise is normal. So the recommendations? 1, don't try to understand every word the speaker says. Ignore unimportant items. 2, relax. Relax. And listen for the main message. You should pay attention to the most important ideas. In this way, you don't waste energy trying to understand something that doesn't really matter, like all the jokes your teacher might tell in class. Use your mental energy for understanding the main ideas. Let's talk about the fourth issue, predicting. This is a normal activity in your native language. When you're listening in Spanish, you think, okay, what are they going to say next? You know many times what the person is going to say next, right? Because there are certain rules that we follow in a conversation. Think about this. If your friend is talking on the telephone and you are with your friend, you probably know what the other person is saying just because of what your friend says. You do a certain amount of guessing and predicting all the time. So when you're listening in Spanish, you might think, they're going to say this. Or after they say something, you think, I knew they were going to say that. So if you can predict in Spanish, you can obviously predict in English. So you can anticipate what is coming next and constantly modify your comprehension. One way you can do this is to listen for certain words that guide a conversation. If I say, I'd like to go to the movies, but, you know the next thing will be in contrast because of the word but. Another thing you might say is, if you had called me, you know that what comes next is something in the conditional. So if you had called me, we would have been able to go out to eat, but you didn't call me. Another way you predict, especially in Spanish, is when you hear idioms or common sayings, as in, el que muestre el hambre. You know what comes next. But you don't know all the idiomatic expressions in English. Heck, I don't even know all the idiomatic expressions in English. So if somebody says, he's barking up the wrong, you probably don't know the next word is tree. And you don't know what the phrase means. You might picture a dog barking up a tree. Idiomatic expressions are hard to predict in English. The good news is, for the most part, predicting is just taking advantage of the skill which you already have, and then applying it to another language. So, my recommendations are predicting are 1. Use your predicting skills that you would use in your native language. And 2. Keep increasing your knowledge of the vocabulary and grammar in English so you can predict better. The fifth thing we're going to talk about is understanding colloquial language. Now, where I'm from in the United States, in Boston, you might hear people say, "That's wicked cool." Wicked cool. You're probably thinking, what does that mean? Well, in Boston, wicked means very, and cool means great. It's like in Spanish if you add re to something in front of an adjective, like re bacano. So if I say to you, your shoes are wicked cool, then that's a good thing. This is just one example of colloquial language. So let's define colloquial language, our fifth topic. If you travel to places where English is spoken, like the United States, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, you'll hear language that is used in everyday, casual conversation. It's different from what you hear in a formal setting or in a classroom, or what you see in writing, because you can't always find the meanings of these words in a dictionary. Many of the words that people use every day in a very informal situation are unknown to the non-native speaker. Also, the pronunciation of some words changes in everyday speech, and this can create a problem for the learner, where you don't understand what is said. We're going to talk about two different types of colloquial language. One, words and phrases, and two, different pronunciations. First, words and phrases. In Colombian Spanish, you use a lot of words and phrases that other speakers wouldn't know, even other native Spanish speakers from other countries. When I first came to Bogota, it was during the Sub-20 World Cup a few years ago. I was with a friend and her mother said, "¿Cuándo se acaba esta vaina?" I learned Spanish in Costa Rica and Guatemala, so I didn't know what vaina meant. I didn't know it meant thing. There's many other words. Chévere, el man, paila, mi llave, que mamera, chuzo. The list could go on and on. We could call these words slang. So, many native speakers of English also use these kinds of words in their everyday conversation. The word stuff for things, or the word dude for man. Actually, there are many words that can mean man: dude, fella, guy, mate, pal, bloke, and so on. There's actually an online dictionary dedicated to slang, urbandictionary.com. Look it up when you have time. There are many, many phrases that are used informally. There are also informal greetings, like some of you might say "entonces" to a friend in Spanish. In English, we have "what's up?" Or they might reduce it to "sup." All this means is "hi, how are you?" But it's a colloquial slang greeting. If you've ever seen a famous Super Bowl commercial from my country where all of these men are answering the phone and they're saying, "What's up?" That's an example. Now, you want to be familiar with slang and colloquial phrases because a lot of people talk like this in their everyday speech. So what can you do? Learn the words in the context of informal speech. That doesn't seem too hard. I think you can do that. But then, there is something else that native speakers do when they talk. Often, they will change the pronunciation of a word or make it shorter. These are called reductions. This makes it really hard to understand what they're saying. Here's an example. A question like, "Do you want a beer?" is not said with every word pronounced clearly. It can become, "Do you want a beer? Do you want a beer? Do you want a beer? Want a beer?" In this example, the sentence becomes shorter and shorter every time, reducing some words. This is very common for all speakers of English, even very educated speakers of English. Remember when we talked about stress in sentences? That some words sound stronger than others? Well, other words are reduced or said quieter or shorter. Also, the pronunciation changes. Small function words like for, to, him, do, and many more are not stressed in a sentence. So they are often reduced. Listen. I need fruit for the picnic. Are you going to the party? Tell him to come here. And this sentence has all three in a row. We're waiting for him to come. Among other words are words like can, have, you, of. Can could be reduced to kun. Have can be reduced to v. You can be reduced to ya. And of can be reduced to only the schwa, So that's a little strange, right? But wait, there's more. Speakers also combine these function words, so they sound like only one word, and the pronunciation changes too. So the sentence, what do you want, becomes, what do you want? Or, what you want? The sentence, she's going to see a movie, becomes, she's gonna see a movie, where you have going to that becomes gonna. Another example, today I want to leave early becomes, today I want to leave early. We combine the want and to and say wanna. Here's one more example. They have to go to work becomes, they have to go to work. These combinations of words are used by most native speakers, including well-educated, clearly speaking English teachers like myself. So, why can this be a problem for non-native speakers of English? Well, because if you're used to seeing these words and hearing these words when they're said by themselves, as in the word to, for, this, him, have to, want to, going to, you may not recognize it when they say it in common speech, because these words often don't sound the same when said in a sentence. This makes it hard to identify the word quickly. And remember, spoken language goes very quickly. So here are some recommendations for colloquial language. 1. Learn the common reductions in English and get used to hearing them in informal speech. 2. Listen to a lot, again, of informal speech in English and use the Urban Dictionary to understand slang and other colloquial phrases. So that's understanding colloquial language. Ugh, it's wicked hot in here. Can somebody get me a glass of water? The sixth factor is fatigue. Now this is going to be a little bit quicker than the other factors we've talked about. Fatigue is when you simply get tired. The longer you have to listen in English, in any foreign language, the more exhausting the experience. So if you begin to get tired, then your ability to comprehend is going to decrease. You might run out of energy to understand. So what's the recommendation to combat fatigue? Well, you might think about it this way. If you're going to be in a situation where you're going to listen to a lot of English, take breaks and rest your mind for a little while so you can get up the energy again to understand. I reckon they'll be coming over soon to watch the game. You want to give them a call? What did I say? Did you understand? If your answer is no, don't worry. It is another aspect you need to pay attention to when listening in a foreign language. Our seventh aspect, understanding different accents. Now, you might be surprised when you listen to a person that is not your teacher speaking in English and you do not understand. This may happen because you are used to listening to a particular kind of accent. For example, I'm from the United States, so my students in my class are used to my accent. But if a teacher from another part of the world comes to my class, maybe they would have a little bit of difficulty understanding the accent. Now, this is an example also for me that because I'm used to the Spanish here in Bogota, it's difficult for me to understand the accent in Argentina. So the idea with accents is that whatever accent we are used to listening to, that is the accent we will understand the best. And all other accents might be more difficult for us to understand. Now, some people might say that somebody's accent is wrong or inferior. But strictly speaking, there are no wrong accents. There are just accents that might be more difficult for you to understand because you're not used to it. Also, you have to consider that today in the world, people speak English from all over the world, all different countries. And especially there are some nations where they speak English as a second language and they use it in all of the official business, like Jamaica or India. They might have a particular accent in English that is not like the accent in Great Britain or in the United States. I want you to consider this for a minute. If you were to meet a German person here in Bogota, and they don't speak Spanish, and you don't speak German, what language will you most likely communicate with? You will use English. And that person is going to have an accent in English. So the idea behind understanding different accents is that there are all different accents that you're going to be listening to in English. So you have to be prepared to listen carefully and to get the main idea. So if you have some experience listening to and understanding different accents, then you'll be able to cope with all of these other accents much better. So imagine this, if you've only heard one accent in a language, if somebody you meet is not from that accent, you may not understand them, right? So the idea is to expose yourself to as many accents as possible. So here are our recommendations. 1, try to get familiar with the most useful English accents, British and the English that is spoken in the United States. So these are the ones you might hear the most. But remember, just because they're the standard doesn't mean that they're the right ones. And 2, once you are familiar with these 2 accents, try to do some other activities, like watching a Scottish movie like Trainspotting. You'll like it. Or watching TV from Australia. I think on the channels here in Bogota you can find the TLC channel that has programs from Australia that you can actually watch in English and hear the accent there. The last problem we're going to talk about is using visual and environmental clues. Now, why is it difficult to get the main message of the person you're talking to sometimes? It's maybe because you're not using the clues that you have in front of you. To understand somebody, you get a lot of visual information from the facial expressions, the movement of the body, to grasp the meaning. Meaning comes not only from words themselves, of course, but also from facial expressions, body language, gestures, etc. Because I can say something with my words, right? But I could mean totally the opposite thing if I do something different with my eyes or with my face. For example, if a wife says to her husband, "Do you love me?" And he responds like this, "Of course I do." Do you really think he loves her? I don't know. The message is in what he does and not what he says. So this is why these clues are really, really important. So when we think about visual clues, that's one thing, right? The facial expressions, the body movement, the gestures. Environmental clues, there's the same idea there. If you're at a party, you might expect certain kinds of talk at the party with some specific vocabulary and something you're not going to use in a classroom. And think about a classroom. For example, if you might anticipate what the teacher is going to talk about according to the subject you are studying. Or in a store. Let's say you're buying clothes. You can assume the conversation will be about buying products, looking for the right product, etc. Here are the recommendations. 1. Try to relax. Gather what you can from the info you can process. And 2, use common sense from your native language to understand the message as a whole, considering common situations that happen in life. Falls in the middle of the blah. Okay, John. There's a lot of noise. Which word did I say? I didn't do that right. Pay attention to.